All right, welcome in. This is the Buddy Deal Show. It's been a little bit, but we're back to cover all the things that have been happening in college football. It is Monday, December 4th. It's the day after Selection Sunday. A lot of drama happened yesterday. We'll get to that in just a second. But first, we're going to start off with what caused all the drama, and that was the conference championship games. We're going to go in chronological order with the Power Five. Start with the Pac-12 championship, which was on Friday night. It was in Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. Oregon took on Washington. All week leading up to it, everybody just assumed Oregon was going to win. They were actually favored by 9.5 in this game, even though Washington had already beaten them in the regular season. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that it's the old adage where people say that it's hard to beat a good team twice, which it is. There's no doubt about that. But Washington came to play. Jumped out early on Oregon. Oregon fought back really hard, though, and made it a close game. Washington had to score late to take the lead back after Oregon retook the lead. Was able to come back, take the lead over the Huskies. But Michael Penix Jr. played really well. The touchdowns and stuff don't really make it seem like that, but he played really well. He was 27 of 39 for 319 yards. He had only one touchdown and threw an interception. Bo Nix, his counterpart, played really well too. Struggled a little bit early, like I said, but came back really strong in the second quarter and the second half. He ended up 21 of 34 for 239. He threw 3 touchdowns, and he also had an interception. Those interceptions were big plays in the game because Washington was driving. Threw a pick on a play that really was just an unfortunate play for Washington. Bo Nix gave it right back to him that same drive, the next drive. Gave Washington good field position, were able to go and score. I thought the player of the game, even though Michael Penix played really well, it was Dylan Johnson. Dylan Johnson was banged up from the week before, but still played through it. He ran the ball 28 times for 152 yards and scored 2 touchdowns. I thought that was a great pickup for them this offseason. He transferred from Mississippi State and came to Washington, and he was their go-to running back. He played well all year, and especially in this game, and led the Huskies to a 34-31 win over Oregon, which knocked Oregon out of the playoff picture, and it basically put Washington in. They finished the year 13-0, won the Pac-12. They did everything they had to do to make it to the playoff. They gave them like a 99% chance to make the playoff after that, and they were pretty much a lock. Then you go to the Big 12 championship, which was Saturday morning at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. Oklahoma State took on Texas. This was a really big deal for the Big 12. As everybody knows, Texas is going to the SEC next year, so this was Texas's last game in the Big 12. Oklahoma State had an opportunity to kind of put the entire conference on their back and win this one for the conference over Texas, but Texas came out swinging hard and quick. Quinn Ewers was incredible. He was 35 of 46 for 452 yards, which was a Big 12 championship record. And he also threw for 4 touchdowns, which tied a Big 12 championship record. He did throw an interception, but that didn't really matter because Texas blew out Oklahoma State 49-21. Texas made themselves look like they were one of the best teams in the country. They did lose to Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry, but they had big wins in the year against at Alabama, which many thought was the win of the year. They made a strong case to make the playoff. However, they were ranked number 7 in the most recent playoff rankings, and no team has ever come from outside of the top 6 to make the playoff. So you didn't really know what was going to happen. They still needed some things to go their way. One of the things they didn't need to go their way was Alabama winning. In the SEC championship game in Atlanta, Georgia, they took on number 1 Georgia, who had not lost since the 2021 SEC championship game against Alabama. So they had won 29 straight games. Georgia drove down the field their first drive of the game. Looked like they had an opportunity to go and just prove their dominance and cakewalk into the playoff. But Alabama and Jalen Milroe came right back at them. Looked really good the entire game. Georgia struggled right after that first drive for a really long time, and Alabama took advantage of it. Jalen Milroe played well. He ended up 13 of 23 for 192 yards, and he threw for 2 touchdowns. He wasn't as effective in the run game as he had been the last few games, but Georgia had athletes all over the field, and they had spies. They weren't going to let him beat him with his legs. So he ended up finding a way to beat him with his arm. Georgia had a really costly turnover in the fourth quarter inside their own 20. Alabama converted that into a field goal, and to go up 10, Georgia still had an opportunity, went down and scored to cut it to 3. And Alabama, all they had to do was find a way to run out the clock. Jalen Milroe used those legs on 2 plays and picked up 2 crucial first downs and was able to run out the clock. And the Tide won again in the SEC Championship. Alabama has not lost a game in Atlanta, whether it was the SEC Championship game, a regular season game, or a national championship game, since 2008, when the Florida Gators, led by Tim Tebow, Urban Meyer, Percy Harvin, all of those incredible players, they were the last team to beat Alabama in Atlanta. They haven't lost since. They've won like 16, 17 games in a row there. And Alabama ended up winning that game 27-24, beat number 1 Georgia for the first time in 2 years. That's the first time Georgia has lost. So now you go from Texas beating Alabama back in September, looking like the best win of the year. Now you can argue that the Alabama win over Georgia this past weekend looked like the best one of the year. So now you have 2 teams with 1 loss who are conference champions, look like they're 2 of the best 4 teams in the country. Now that causes the committee all kinds of problems now. Now you have 2 conference championship games left, the Big Ten and the ACC. And the main one, the question was going to be Florida State, because Michigan, they played Iowa in the Big Ten championship. That game was Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. All they had to do was win, just because they've proven enough this year that they look like they're the best team. If they go undefeated and win the Big Ten, then they're going to be in. And that's exactly what they did. Blake Corum had a solid game. He carried the ball 16 times. He only had 52 yards, but he scored 2 touchdowns. Now he became he has more touchdowns now than any player in Michigan program history, which is a long storied history, and that's a really big accomplishment for Blake Corum. However, Michigan only had 213 total yards. Don't get me wrong, Iowa's defense is really good, but I'm not sure if that bodes well for Michigan moving forward. Like I said, they won. They're pretty much a lock for the playoff. This was Jim Harbaugh's first game back from a suspension. The defense is really good, don't get me wrong, but you got to take into account how bad Iowa's offense was. It was so bad that the team total for each half was 0.5 points. So basically, Vegas wasn't even expecting them to score. Turns out Vegas was right. Michigan won this game 26-0. Like I said, Iowa's offense has been historically bad this year. It was a easy game pretty much for Michigan, but they took care of business. They went 13-0, won the Big Ten, so they're pretty much a lock as well as Washington. The big game came Saturday night. It was the ACC Championship game. That game was played in the Panther Stadium in Charlotte, North Carolina. Number 14 Louisville took on number 4 Florida State. Florida State has been in the top 4 pretty much the entire season after they beat Clemson. As most people know, Jordan Travis was injured 2 weeks ago. Pretty bad lower leg injury, and it would miss the rest of the season. But Florida State was able to come back and win a game the day when he got hurt. Was able to beat Florida in the Swamp. Whether you think that Florida's a good team or not, there was still a big rivalry game on the road that they were able to win without their starting quarterback. However, their backup was injured. Tate Rodemaker was injured in that game. He's in concussion protocol and was not able to play in the ACC Championship game. So they turned to third-string quarterback Brock Glenn. This game was very ugly. Not a whole lot of offense. Louisville did not really step up when they had an opportunity to go and win a big game. That would put them in a New Year's Six Bowl, would make the committee's decision a lot easier if they were able to beat Florida State. But Florida State's defense stepped up, really made some big plays, and was able to hold Louisville to only 6 points. Say what you will about Florida State not being able to move the ball much with the third-string quarterback. They made opportunity. They tried to fix it. They went with Lawrence Toafili as a Wildcat quarterback a lot of the game. When Brock Glenn was not able to move the ball very well, it worked. He ran 10 times for 118 yards and a touchdown. That was enough for the Seminoles to find a way to win this game. Like I said, Louisville had opportunities. They were able to not even block a punt, but they actually tackled the punter because they had such a good rush at Florida State's own 12-yard line, and they weren't able to score. Jack Plummer threw an interception in the end zone. This was 2 plays after a really close call that could have gone either way. Ball to the tight end in the back of the end zone. The referee said that the ball hit the ground and that the Florida State defender was able to rip the ball away as he was going out of bounds. And so that 2 plays later threw an interception, and Louisville was never really able to get anything else going. So Florida State won this game 16-6. That put them at 13-0. They went undefeated. They had big wins this year against LSU. They beat Clemson. They won the ACC championship game. So now the question was, you knew that Michigan and Washington were pretty much locks. They were going to be in. So now you were left with 3 teams for 2 spots. You had Texas, Alabama, and Florida State. Florida State did everything they could. They won every game. They won the ACC championship game. Texas had 1 loss to Oklahoma, but beat Alabama in a head-to-head match early in September. That was also Alabama's only loss. They went 8-0 in the SEC and won the SEC championship game against the number 1 team, Georgia. So now you're left with who's in. That's the question that the playoff committee asks all year long and make it a fun thing. Who's in? But this was the first time the committee has really had a tough decision to make in the 10-year history of the 4-team playoff. And so number 1, they went with Michigan, which everybody expected. Number 2 was Washington, which everybody also expected. The head-to-head matchup between Texas and Alabama proved to be a big deal. They put Texas at 3. So then the question was, do they put Alabama at 4? Do they put Florida State at 4? Georgia was kind of on the outside looking in since they did not win the SEC championship game, even though you think that Georgia is one of the better teams in the country. Eventually, the committee went with Alabama at number 4 and Florida State at number 5, which caused a lot of outrage from Florida State fans and people across the country anyway. People were saying that it was an SEC bias. It was planned because they didn't think that they could leave an SEC team out in the playoffs since that has never happened before. But I think what ended up happening is the committee went with the 4 best teams. Florida State became the first Power 5 undefeated team to not make the playoff. This has not ever happened in the playoff committee's time. The 12-team playoff is coming next year. It seems that it's going to be a year too late. Like I said, Florida State was not happy. I don't blame them. They did everything that they could to make it. Do I think that Florida State would be able to go and beat Michigan or Washington or Alabama or Texas? No, I don't. I think that Jordan Travis being out was a big deal. Not only that, the committee wrote into their criteria for making the playoff basically an excuse for this. They wrote in that if there's significant injuries to key players, that could be enough to keep a team out of the playoffs. Turns out that they have not had to use that, but they ended up having to this year. Florida State fans would point back to the very first playoff when Ohio State and their third-string quarterback, Cardale Jones, went and played in the playoff. They actually ended up winning the whole thing. But Cardale Jones, nothing against Brock Glenn, but Cardale Jones lit it up in the Big 12 in the Big 10 championship game the week before the playoff committee selected, and he was a really talented quarterback that ended up making it a run for Ohio State and win the first ever playoff. This is not the same deal. The question really the committee had was, do you put the best 4 teams in or the 4 teams that most deserve it? Because if it was the most deserving teams, then yes, it would, in my opinion, would be Michigan, Washington, Texas, since they beat Alabama, and Florida State because they went undefeated. But they apparently went with the best, even though now you say that they went with the best, you can't really make that argument anymore either, because you can't tell me that Georgia's not one of the best 4 teams in the country. They haven't lost in 2 years, and the only loss that they had was a very close game against another team that a lot of people consider one of the best 4 teams in Alabama. So it's a huge issue right now for the committee, and it's one, like I said, that if this happened next year, you wouldn't have this problem because there's going to be a 12-team playoff. I would like to note, though, that there were 5 members on the committee that had ACC ties, including the chair, Boo Corrigan. Not only that, Peter Burns tweeted out yesterday, made a great point, said that while understandable that they were upset, they have to remember why we didn't have a 12-team playoff this year. Back in February of 2022, the 3 members of the alliance, which was the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12, all voted against expanding the college football playoff earlier than 2024. If they would not have voted for that, more than likely, there would have been a 12-team playoff this year, and you wouldn't have this problem. It's unfortunate for Florida State, their fans, their players, their coaches. It's heartbreaking. It really is. But at the same time, they kind of made this their bed, and now they have to lie in it. There will be a bowl matchup we'll get to in just a little bit. We're going to cover all the bowl games, and they'll have their chance to show whether or not they were right or wrong. But it's just, like I said, it's unfortunate. But the playoff is now going to be Michigan against Alabama in the Rose Bowl, which is going to be awesome, and Washington and Texas in the Sugar Bowl, which should be a fun shootout. It's going to be, I think this potentially has a chance to be the best playoff that we've had in the 10-year 14 playoff. Just because, you've had blowouts in every single year, whether it was the 1 against the 4, the 2 against the 3, or the national championship game like last year when Georgia beat TCU by 7 touchdowns. It's going to be a lot of fun. But before we get to that, let's cover a couple of the coaching changes that has happened in the past few weeks. Most notably, Texas A&M fired Jimbo Fisher. They had to pay the $76 million buyout. The Aggies were just not happy with the way that Jimbo Fisher was leading their program. I completely understand. They had spent more money in transfers and recruiting and NIL than anybody in the country, and they were not getting results. They went 5-7 last year. They went 7-5 this year. That's just not going to cut it, especially in the SEC when you're competing against Alabama, Georgia, LSU, now even Ole Miss. Ole Miss has kind of put themselves in a situation to where they're one of the better teams in the SEC, and they have not been able to win games against those teams. So they fired Jimbo Fisher, and they've now hired Mike Elko, who led Duke to a really good last 2 years, but fell a little bit short this year. They lost their quarterback, Riley Leonard, but I think that's an interesting hire. I think it'll be better than Jimbo because there won't be quite as many expectations as Jimbo brought. But I don't expect Texas A&M to just turn around just off the super quickly. But we'll see what happens there. Mississippi State fired first-year coach Zach Arnett, who took over as the interim head coach last year in the bowl game after Mike Leach unfortunately passed away. I'm surprised that Mississippi State did not give him more time. I thought he was a really good fit for that program. But now they didn't. They gave him 8 or 9 games, and they let him go. They go and hire offensive coordinator from Oklahoma, Jeff Lebby. Interesting note there, Jeff Lebby was the offensive coordinator at Ole Miss for Lane Kiffin's first 2 years at Ole Miss. So that's going to be an interesting tie there, especially when it comes to the Egg Bowl in late November of next year. I felt like Zach Arnett was a better fit for Mississippi State than Jeff Lebby is. I think that we go back and look at the past 20 years or so of Mississippi State football, their most successful head coach was Dan Mullen. I thought the way that Dan Mullen was able to have so much success was he got the fan base on his side. The way he got the fan base on his side was to get them to hate Ole Miss. Whether you like that thought or not, I felt like that's exactly what he did. And I don't think that Jeff Lebby is going to be able to do that because of his ties to Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin. And I think that's the easiest way to get the Mississippi State fan base all on one side. And I think that's just going to be really hard for him to do. He brings in an offensive mind that they haven't had. Now, Mike Leach was an offensive mind, but it wasn't quite the same as Jeff Lebby. He is more modern a little bit, doesn't really run air raid, but he also is not scared to throw the ball like Mike Leach was as well. Another big firing was Houston fired Daniel Holgerson, who had been there for a really long time, had done well there, struggled the last couple of years, and they went and picked up a big name in Willie Fritz, who has done an exceptional job at Tulane. When he took over the year before, Tulane was 2-10. Last year they went, I believe, 12-1 with a huge Sugar Bowl win or Cotton Bowl win over USC. We're right there on the edge of winning and getting back into the New Year's Six Bowl this year, but fell short to SMU in the American Conference Championship game on Saturday, and they're going to miss out on that. Now they're going to lose their coach. So now Tulane's going to have to go through a rebuilding process, I imagine, and it's going to be pretty tough for them. Big hire for Houston, though. Transfer portal officially opened today on Monday, and the transfer portal has been crazy the last few years. This might be the craziest so far. There are some big name quarterbacks that have already entered. Just today, Kyle McCord, Ohio State's quarterback, who went 11-1 this year, threw for over 3,000 yards. He entered the portal. He's not going to be at Ohio State next year. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the amount of hate that he got from Ohio State fans. I believe that most of that hate was unwarranted. Ohio State fans have gotten spoiled at the quarterback position the last 10 years. You had J.T. Barrett, Braxton Miller, Cardale Jones, who won him a national championship. Then you go to, you have C.J. Stroud. You have all kinds of great quarterbacks at Ohio State year after year after year, and you get Kyle McCord, who's not a bad quarterback. He's just not quite on the same level as them. Like you had Justin Fields a couple years ago. I mean, it's Ohio State had so many good quarterbacks. I think they got spoiled. They hated on Kyle McCord, whether it was warranted or not, and now he's gone. That's going to be an interesting one. We'll see where he goes. Not only he entered the portal today, but also Oklahoma quarterback Dylan Gabriel entered. This is going to be interesting because, like I said, Jeff Lebby is now at Mississippi State. Dylan Gabriel left UCF to go to Oklahoma because of Jeff Lebby. Jeff Lebby was his offensive coordinator when Dylan Gabriel was at UCF. He followed him to Oklahoma. Now he would not shock me at all if he ends up at Mississippi State, which could be a lot of fun for Mississippi State fans because that's a quarterback on a level that they haven't had since arguably Dak Prescott. So that could be an interesting to see where he ends up. Oregon State quarterback DJ Uiagalelei enters the portal again after Oregon State's head coach left. That's another one. Washington State quarterback Cam Ward had a really good year this year. A lot of rumors are saying that he's going to end up at Ohio State. That's one reason why Kyle McCord is leaving. UCLA quarterback Dante Moore is in the portal. Kansas State quarterback Will Howard's in the portal. Duke quarterback Riley Leonard, who I mentioned earlier with Mike Elko, he was injured this year, missed the rest of the year, but he also entered the portal. Coastal Carolina quarterback Grayson McCall, who's apparently played 10 years of college football, he still has another year of eligibility. He's in the portal. Been really good for the Chanticleers. Miami quarterback Tyler Van Dyke entered the portal. And Mississippi State quarterback Will Rogers, who was there for so long with Mike Leach, he has another year of eligibility, and he entered the portal as well. That's just a couple of the quarterbacks. There's a lot of good defensive players, receivers, running backs. Everybody's entering the portal right now. There's a ton of them. Friend of the program, Mac Howard from Utah, he entered the portal earlier today as well. Hope the best for him, especially. He's a good friend, and I hope everything goes well for him, ends up at a great spot. But like I said, this is today's college football. It's not really an amateur sport anymore. It is basically professional football with almost unlimited free agency. Like I said, a couple of these guys, Dylan Gabriel, DJ Uiagalelei, Tyler Van Dyke, all these guys have transferred more than once now. So this is an interesting progression of the game, and it's only going to get worse unless somebody comes and makes some new rules about how you can either transfer once or they're going to change the transfer portal completely. It's a lot of issues going on in the college game, that NIL money, all kinds of different stuff. But we'll get to that later on in another time once we see where these names end up. But let's get to the bowl games. The bowl games are starting pretty quickly the next 2 weeks. It's one of the most fun times of the year. There's games almost every day. In my opinion, there's too many bowl games now, but that's my opinion. You can like it or not. There's just so many games, it almost waters down the meaningfulness of the games. But let's start with the first game. There's a bunch of games on Saturday, December the 16th. I'm going to start out with the Myrtle Beach Bowl. That's going to be Georgia Southern versus Ohio. Should be an interesting matchup. The Celebration Bowl, which is basically been dubbed the HBCU National Championship game. Jackson State with Deion's been in it a couple of years in a row. They lost both those games, but they're not in it this year. This year it's going to be Florida A&M versus Howard. Later on that day, the New Orleans Bowl, we got Jacksonville State against Louisiana, formerly Louisiana Lafayette. The Cure Bowl, Miami of Ohio, who won a big game the other day in the MAC. They will play App State. New Mexico Bowl, you got Fresno State against New Mexico State. So New Mexico State doesn't have to go very far. Basically going to play a home game. The LA Bowl, that's going to be, speaking of not having to go very far, it's UCLA in Los Angeles against Boise State, who also fired their coach this year. Then the Independence Bowl was the last game of that day. It's going to be Texas Tech against Cal. I saw a funny tweet the other day, or yesterday actually, after the game was announced. Texas Tech put out a statement just explaining to the Texas Tech fans where Shreveport, Louisiana was. Apparently people didn't know about the history of the Independence Bowl. If you get on Twitter and follow Bunky Perkins, you will know how important that bowl game is. Some really interesting matchups. There used to be an SEC affiliation, not anymore. So that's going to wrap it up for that Saturday. The next game is going to be on Monday, the 18th. That's going to be the Bahamas Bowl. It's got Western Kentucky, who's had a couple of really good games in that matchup, in that bowl game against Old Dominion. Tuesday, the 19th, is going to be the Frisco Bowl, Marshall against UTSA. Thursday, the 21st, you got the Boca Raton Bowl. It's USF against Syracuse. Friday, the 22nd, you got the Gasparilla Bowl, Georgia Tech against UCF. And then we're back to another Saturday with a lot more bowl games. The 23rd, you got the Birmingham Bowl, Troy versus Duke. The Camellia Bowl, Arkansas State against Northern Illinois. The Armed Forces Bowl, Air Force against James Madison, which is really interesting because I didn't think they were going to let them go to a bowl game. I don't know how that changed, but now James Madison is going to play Air Force in the Armed Forces Bowl, which should be a really interesting matchup. The famous Idaho Potato Bowl, you have Georgia State going all the way out to Idaho to take on Utah State. The 68 Ventures Bowl is going to be Eastern Michigan against South Alabama, who had a really good year this year, especially after what they've been doing the past few years. The Las Vegas Bowl, Northwestern turned it around after Pat Fitzgerald was fired back in July due to covering up some sexual assault accusations. It was a mess up there at Northwestern. We're able to bounce back and make it to a bowl game. They're going to play the Las Vegas Bowl against a really good Utah team. The Hawaii Bowl, this game's usually on Christmas Eve. Not this year because it's going to be on a Saturday. That game is going to be San Jose State against Coastal Carolina, who will not have Grayson McCall, which I said earlier was one of the guys that's in the portal. Then you go after the day after Christmas, Tuesday the 26th, you got the Quick Lane Bowl with Bowling Green in Minnesota. The First Responder Bowl with Texas State against Rice. Two Texas teams there. Guaranteed Rate Bowl is going to be Kansas against UNLV. UNLV is back bowling for the first time in over 10 years. Wednesday, the 27th, you're going to have the Military Bowl. Tulane against Virginia Tech. The Duke's Mayo Bowl, the winner of that, the coach will be doused in Duke's Mayo, which sounds awful, but that's going to be North Carolina against West Virginia. The Holiday Bowl, number 18 Louisville, who had an opportunity, like I said, to win the ACC championship game, make it to New Year's Six Bowl. They did not do either of those things. They will take on USC. However, Caleb Williams has announced that he will not play in this bowl game. I don't think if you followed the sport, this comes to a surprise to anybody. Caleb Williams has been one of the more flaky players in the country. He's said whether he hasn't decided whether or not he's going to go to the NFL draft. Who knows at this point? I honestly got to the point where I don't care. If he goes, he goes. Oh, well. Good luck. Last game of that day is going to be the Texas Bowl. First SEC match. First SEC affiliation in the bowl season. That's going to be number 20 Oklahoma State, who just fell to Texas against another school from Texas and Texas A&M. Like I said, Texas A&M was able to make a bowl game this year, unlike they did last year. Even though now they will not have Jimbo Fisher, still have their interim head coach coaching that game. Should be an interesting matchup. Thursday, the 28th, you have the Fenway Bowl played in Fenway Park in Boston. That's going to be number 24 SMU against Boston College. A lot of people thought that SMU might be able to slide into a New Year's Six Bowl after beating Tulane. Were not able to. They were not the highest ranked group of 5 team. Just missed that by 1 spot. Then the Pinstripe Bowl, which is going to play in Yankee Stadium. That's going to be Rutgers against Miami, Florida. Like I said, Miami will be without Tyler Van Dyke, their quarterback all year, who has also entered the transfer portal. The Pop-Tarts Bowl. Now we have bowls named after breakfast food. This is what I'm saying with there's too many bowl games. But that's going to be number 18 NC State against number 25 Kansas State. Actually a pretty good matchup there. The Alamo Bowl is going to be number 12 Oklahoma against number 14 Arizona. That should be a really good one. Then you have Friday the 29th. You have the Gator Bowl. You got number 22 Clemson against Kentucky. Kentucky last played against Louisville, and won a big game against them. Then you have the Sun Bowl out in El Paso. Number 16 Notre Dame takes on number 19 Oregon State. Like I said, Oregon State's not going to have DJ Uiagalelei. All these games are affected by the transfer portal now. It's gotten to a point to where it's a little bit ridiculous. Then you have the Liberty Bowl. Memphis has to go maybe to the other locker room. That's where they play every week. They get to play a home game against Iowa State. Iowa State had a great game a couple weeks ago in the snow against Kansas State, and they were able to win that one. But now these teams aren't even having to go anywhere. That's like 3 or 4 games where the teams that are playing the bowl game are playing in their hometown. I mean, interesting. Saturday, December the 30th, you got a couple of SEC teams playing. You have the Music City Bowl. Auburn's going to take on Maryland. And then the Barstow, Arizona Bowl is going to be Wyoming against Toledo. Should be a fun matchup. Then on January 1st, New Year's Day, you have the ReliaQuest Bowl. Number 13 LSU takes on Wisconsin. Jaden Daniels may or may not be the Heisman winner at that point. He'll have a chance to show off for the LSU fans one more time. Then the Citrus Bowl is going to be number 17 Iowa against number 21 Tennessee. If Tennessee scores 7 points, they might win that game because Iowa cannot score. That's all the bowl games outside the New Year's Six games. Now we're going to get to those, which is at this point now the only games that people seem to care about because the bowl games have lost their significance because of the playoff. A lot of different reasons. But on Friday, December the 29th, it's going to be the Cotton Bowl. This should be a really interesting one. It's number 7 Ohio State, which now will not have Kyle McCord. Changes a lot for the Buckeyes. They're going to take on number 9 Missouri. Missouri is very happy to be at this game. I don't expect many opt-outs in this one for Missouri. I wouldn't surprise me to see a couple of them from Ohio State. Without Kyle McCord, who knows if Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to play again. They've already had a couple of receivers enter the portal. Don't be shocked to see Missouri upset the Buckeyes here and win a big one for their program and Eli Drinkwitz. On Saturday, December the 30th, the Peach Bowl is going to be early in the morning. This was a game that shocked me when I saw it yesterday when they announced it. Number 10, Penn State is going to take on number 11, Ole Miss. I was thrilled to see this matchup. Ole Miss and Penn State have never played each other. Lane Kiffin said earlier today or yesterday that he does not expect any opt-outs. Already had a couple of guys that could have possibly transferred. I've already announced that they were coming back. This is a great opportunity for Ole Miss to springboard their season next year with a big win against Penn State. They also have an opportunity to win 11 games in a season for the first time in program history. This is going to be a really fun matchup. I can't wait for it. It's a really good offense against a really good defense in Penn State. Penn State's a solid offense as well, and I would say the same about Ole Miss's defense. They're solid. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. So you don't really know what you're going to get there. Then the Orange Bowl. This one is the one that I feel like a lot of people have circled because it's going to be those two teams that were left out of the playoff. You got number 5, Florida State, taking on number 6, Georgia. Georgia has an opportunity to prove to the committee that the committee was right if they go and dominate Florida State here. Florida State has a chance to really piss everybody off if they go and upset Georgia. I don't see this game. I don't expect Florida State to be able to win this game just because backup quarterback against the talent on the other side of the ball with Georgia. The question is going to be who opts out. How many players opt out from both sides? Does Brock Bowers play because he's been injured the last few weeks? Does Keon Coleman play? Does Wilson play? They're your two great receivers from Florida State. A lot of question marks there, but I think it'll be a really fun matchup. And then the last New Year's Six Bowl that's not a playoff bowl is going to be on New Year's Day, the Fiesta Bowl. Number 8, Oregon will take on the group of 5 highest-ranked team, undefeated number 23, Liberty, who's had a great season. They lost Hugh Freeze in the offseason to Auburn, but they responded with an undefeated season. That's about as good as you could have had it wished for from Liberty. Oregon, like I said, just missed out on the playoff because they lost twice to Washington. Question there is, will Bo Nix play? It'll be interesting if Bo Nix was able to win the Heisman. If he doesn't play in the bowl game, it's possible. His draft stock has gone way up this year, and he will enter the draft. It's just whether or not he plays in this game. A lot of really fun matchups in the bowl season, but we're going to get to now the ones that really matter the most, and it's the college football playoff. First game is going to be on Monday, January the 1st at 4 p.m. Central Time on ESPN. That's going to be the Rose Bowl. Number 1 Michigan against number 4 Alabama. The stat came up the other day when Alabama played Georgia, and Georgia was the favorite in that game. Since 2008, so 15 years, Alabama has been the underdog only 8 times. Now 9 after Georgia. They've won 7 of those games. Nick Saban is able to find motivation without having any motivation. Michigan's favored by 1.5 in this game. So that's going to be 2 games in a row that Alabama is underdogs. I don't think you need a whole lot of motivation if you're Nick Saban now. You have everything what you wanted in front of you. If you go back and watch the clip of when Alabama was announced as the 4th team, they had a video of the reaction of the Michigan players. The Michigan players did not seem very happy about it. They were hoping they were going to get Florida State because they knew that it was going to be an easy win. As soon as they announced Alabama, you could hear some groans. You could see people were a little bit uneasy because they know that they're about to be in an absolute dogfight here. This one is going to be a fun one. Two of the most storied programs in the history of the sport, playing in the most prestigious place in the sport, in the Rose Bowl. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait for it. That's the game that I'm the most excited about. The way that Nick Saban has coached this year, and he's won 7 national championships since he's been at Alabama. This might be his best coaching performance of his entire career, and that's saying something. The way that they struggled early, they lost to Texas with Jalen Milroe playing. He benched Jalen Milroe in Game 3 against USF. And then him and offensive coordinator Tommy Rees figured something out. Responded after that USF game by putting Milroe back in the starting position, beat a really good Ole Miss team, and did not lose again. Now, they struggled against Auburn, but it's a rivalry game, and that happens sometimes, especially when you play on the road. And they found ways to win games this year, whether it was against Auburn or Ole Miss or LSU, and then now Georgia. I think that Michigan should be scared of this one. Alabama is absolutely rolling right now. They feel very confident in their ability. And I would be too if I was Alabama. You got to think that they feel pretty good about their opportunity in this game. The other semifinal matchup is going to be in the Sugar Bowl at 7:45 p.m. Central Time. That game is also on ESPN. That game will follow the Rose Bowl, and that is going to be Washington against Texas. Texas is actually favored by 4 in this game. Washington and Texas both can put up a lot of points. Quinn Ewers has played really well as of late after he came back from an injury. Washington has been putting up points all year with Michael Penix, who is going to probably be in New York for the Heisman ceremony. This is a great matchup here, too. This is a perfect way to end the night on New Year's. This is going to be one of the more fun matchups that you're going to have in the entire bowl season. And I honestly think I'm going to have to give Texas a little bit of an edge here because Washington's defense doesn't really do a great job of stopping people, and Texas can put up a lot of points. They have weapons everywhere. Quinn Ewers has, like I said, played really well. Washington can score too, though. But I think Texas defense is going to have a little bit of an edge over Washington's defense. Wouldn't surprise me if Texas pulls this one out. Honestly, I think Alabama will beat Michigan, and I think Texas will beat Washington, and you're going to have a rematch of Week 2 for the national championship. And if you get Alabama in a chance to avenge a loss, you better watch out because the Tide are probably going to roll. Like I said, a lot of fun stuff about to happen this next month in college football. I can't wait for all this to go down. It's been a crazy few days with the playoff committee, with the selections process, but I think it's just getting started. I can't wait for the 12-team playoff next year. It's going to add a little bit more to the playoff and make it a little bit more fun for more teams, give possibly some upsets, get some teams in there that you wouldn't expect. But when it comes to this last year of the 14 playoff, personally, I think this is as good of a playoff as you have. I think this is the best playoff we've had in the 10 years of the college football playoff, and I can't wait. So we will be back at some point just to recap you on what's going on, to update you on transfers, to update you on coaching changes, update everything that happens. But just wanted to get back and let everybody hear what I thought about the state of the college game right now. Like I said, a lot of fun coming up, and hopefully we'll see you pretty soon. And thank you for listening in to the Buddy Dill Show, and we will see y'all next time.